And the decision was I would not stay there. And I felt that. I felt that at that moment a decision was being made. Or perhaps the whole reason was that I could have this knowledge that this exists. This sort of like this occurred for you to have this moment so that you now know. Now you got to go back. Now you got to go back was like a dagger. It was horrible.
Welcome, David. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being invited on here.
You're welcome. And if for those who are watching, could you go over a little bit about your background, what led up to the near-death experience, and other topics that you might feel helpful?
Sure. Well, I'm Dr. David Shorter, or David Delgado Shorter. I don't really use Delgado professionally, but it's on my website. And I am a full professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. I'm also the director of the Archive of Healing, which is the largest collection of sayings about healing from around the world. I also direct the Wiki for Indigenous Languages. I am the founder and creator of both of those projects. I also interestingly enough, have lived with a native tribe in Mexico. My first book was about them called We Will Dance Our Truth. It won a national book award. And I was raised by a person who I would roughly say now is a healer. Now that I've studied healing around the world in different contexts, I would say that my great grandmother was a healer of sorts. She was also a midwife who brought me into the world. She knew me before I was born, she used to say. And so I'm a fairly complex character at this ripe age because I have a PhD. I teach social science research methods. And only now, I think, as I've become an adult, I can realize why I did that, why I went that route, having the childhood I did, because I was very invested once I got to the late teenage to figure out what is truth. How could this be real the way I was raised? And yet we live in a world in which these things are considered mythical or other people's belief systems. I actually wrote several peer-reviewed articles about that notion, about the supernatural and about belief. I've also done 12 to 14 years of interviews with psychics and mediums from a social scientific perspective, but have also at some point in my life been working as a psychic and medium. I don't really do that now anymore. Ever since I got trained in Japan in Gendai Reiki, I really stopped taking clients for psychic work and medium work. But as a child, I think that's pretty much where it started with me. And I think probably how I got onto your radar was that near-death experience that I talked about on another YouTube channel. And I would say if we want to really give that more background, which I think is actually very relevant, but I didn't do it in that other story, was that I was raised by a woman who was my mom's grandmother. My mom was illegitimate, so she was sent to live with her grandmother so that no one would know her mom had had a child. Now, that grandmother, my great grandmother, I thought was my grandmother because when you're born, you don't really know greats and that sort of thing. But she had had pretty interesting life. I'd also known my great great grandmother, who people in the area of Lincoln County, New Mexico, literally talked with my father and my mother about how powerful she was and what a deep history she had had. And I knew her as well. And so my great grandmother, who had known me in the womb, she said, and she did certain things to my body when I was born, she said, to ensure that I had a sort of path. And even though my aunts had all their kids and everyone would have loved for my grandmother to watch their kids because, free childcare, working mothers, Latino mothers in southern New Mexico, she always said no until I was born. And she said, okay, I'll take this one. And she raised me to be a dreamer for the family. So at a very early age, and we're talking 7 or 8, she would regularly ask me what I'd been dreaming, or she would give me contexts or situations, and then she'd ask me about my dreams later. And it became clear to her soon that the clients that were coming to her house for readings and herbal remedies they were actually benefiting from information I was giving her through my dreams. So I grew up before the age of 12 or 13 with fairly complex already taxonomies between which dreams and how to know which dreams and which dreams meant what, the sort of symbology that was working inside my life. For example, I generally knew in elementary school when any woman was going to have a baby or lose her baby, which was intense because I'd
Mm,
have aunts who would be like, "Oh, David, your cousin so and so is pregnant, or your aunt is so and so is pregnant," and I would tell them that child is going to come to term or not. Then I could see it in my head. I won't go into it now what the different symbology is that I knew as a child. Whew, that midwifery stuff that was running through her line is probably a big reason that it came out in that form, that I would know about expectant mothers and about children that would not go through term. That stayed with me until my 20s. But anyway, she had fostered this as a child. She fostered this. My aunts, although they were Catholic, they accepted this because she was the matriarch. You didn't really cross her. So even though they were devoutly Catholic, she had sort of said, this is how it's going to be. Like, you're going to respect him. And I've got him, and I'm sort of working with him. Um, Now, her mom, which is really interesting, her mom was 104. And I was really scared of her. She was blind. She had really, those gray eyes of a blind person when you would see her without her
mhm.
patch. And she, when you're 8 or 9, she had that really soft, loose skin. You know, she
Yeah.
didn't speak English. She mostly spoke Spanish. And my dad and my mom drove us up to Lincoln County because they said, she's not doing well. We should say goodbye to her. We never made it up. And then she had one of her daughters call my mom and say, she wants you to come up and she wants you to bring that David, me. She wants you to bring your son. And my mom, I remember at age 9, my mom saying, we got to go because she wants to see you. So they drove up to Lincoln County, and at one point, they sent me in her room. I was deathly afraid. I mean, this is not a nice thing to say, but this old woman who didn't speak English, who was blind, wanted to see me. And I had sort of maybe at the time thought, I don't really know her and she's scary. Now, in hindsight, I know what it was. She was very, very powerful. And I knew she was, I think at the time, I sort of sensed how powerful she was. So I sat on her bed and she held my hand and she started talking, and then it started to have like a rhythm to it, almost like a mantra or
Mm.
a sort of song of sorts. And she would start to fall asleep, and then she'd come back out and she would just sort of like keep doing this. Now I was just sitting there kind of like, I did not know what was going on. At some point she fell asleep, and I snuck out, and my aunts and my mom were there. They're like, what was that about? And I was like, I don't know. Can I go play? Then she died a few days later. I'm back home, and in the middle of the night, I wake up because she's standing in my room, and she says to me telepathically, "You need to not worry because I put it in you, and when you need it, it'll be there." And that was it. Kind of that sort of basic core message, regardless of languages or how, was I put it in you. You don't need to worry. And when you need it, it'll come out. So before you would even get to this near-death experience, I'd had this happen kind of, kind of preceding that near-death experience, which I think is fairly formative to my experience. That this childhood where I was being raised by a midwife who'd raised me to be the dreamer, then her mom pulled me into a room, and then I saw her after she had died, and then she had communicated this basic message to me of it's in you. And so the near-death experience that I had, I think that was age 14, was already preceded by some pretty intense stuff. Being treated very special, always the kid to say the prayers, always the kid to say the blessing of the food, always the kid that really wasn't allowed to play with all my other cousins because I was don't touch him, don't hurt him, don't play football, you'll get hurt. Like, I was protected in a way that made me so I've interviewed a lot of healers, and a lot of this childhood biography is very similar. And I'm not calling myself a healer. I'm just saying that people who are born into lives in which are distinct in some way. I'm not saying they have a type of arrested development or anything, though I've found that to be true with some healers and that I've interviewed. But I did definitely start seeing myself as having a different path. And that got picked up on by, I think there was a girl in ninth grade. We started liking each other a lot. And then, I don't know how serious one dates in ninth grade, but I was, dating her. And she took me to her house, and her mom, Carolyn Bennett, I don't think she's with us anymore, but she was sort of tapped into the southern New Mexico community of healers and alien abductees, and like really like people who were very interested in what we would now call, spiritualism. And when she met me, she started thinking that I needed to start being apprenticed more carefully. So she introduced me to readings, books, um, introduced me to healers. She would introduce me by inviting me to meetings or and telling people, David has a sort of gift. Then this group taught me how to do this thing called automatic handwriting and how to use kind of anything around you as a tool. And this is where I started learning that different people have different modalities that they work in. As some people are just good at cars, or some people are good at runes, or some people are good at tea leaves or something like that. And at that young age of 12 or 13, I was learning the difference. And that's when she introduced that book to me, Journeys Out of the Body. And I think the combination of not necessarily being a popular kid, always feeling a little bit like I was fine on my own, led so that I just consumed that book at night. I just read it multiple times. And as you know, and probably many of your guests and followers know, that book is quintessential in the history of American literature
Mhm.
about out-of-body experiences. And
Yeah.
at the time there was no Monroe Institute. At the time, it was just this guy who had written this book, and everyone, well, people in definitely certain sectors of the world were reading it, and they were learning this notion of being able to separate from your physical body. And at age 12, 13, I was spending a lot of times by myself in my room practicing. I was I was taking it on before I even knew the word what meditation was, because I was a good Catholic kid. Before one would even know what practicing meant as one's craft. I was just trying to do this thing, and I don't know why I was so pulled to it, but I was. And it clicked for me. Something clicked around that time. In fact, it was around that time that I remembered something, and I went to my mom and asked her if it was true, and she said yes, which is that when I was 9, the same year that my great great grandmother had that experience with me, I remember at one point waking up and going down the very long hallway of our house and getting to the kitchen and realizing I had forgotten my body back into the bedroom. And the moment I had that realization, I sort of went and went back to that body and had seen my mom in the kitchen. And so then at age 13 or 14, when I started reading the Monroe book, Journeys Out of the Body, I asked my mom, because of course at 14 I'm still living at home, Mom, do you remember the time I ran into a kitchen? Is this true? And I said, I just saw you because I had left my body in the bedroom. She's like, I do remember that. So she was affirming for me. She must have thought I was just a weird, weird son. But she's no longer with us, but she was affirming for me at that moment that I had had some sort of OBE, even like maybe around 9 or 10, when things were really kicking off for me in that
Mhm.
sort of realm. So that's the story that really precedes the near-death experience that I had. That's the thing that no one who may ever hear about my near-death experience, because obviously one of the reasons why I love your conversations is that you make a bit more space for people. And I hadn't really expressed all that in that other in people go to my YouTube channel, they'll see it in that story about the near-death experience. All of that I just told you kind of preceded, not kind of, it did precede it in a way, so that by the time I was with that girl that I was dating, still a couple years later, we dated most of our middle, high, and high school years. She was with me in that church when I had my near-death experience. So, um, yeah, I could tell you about the near-death experience now.
Beautiful. Yeah, if you would take us into the near-death experience.
So I'm with her mom a lot. I'm doing automatic handwriting. I'm learning how to make my own sort of makeshift Ouija boards, which I know has a negative connotation, but it doesn't need to. And and Sandra Hunter, the young woman I was dating, said, "Do you want to go to a church lock-in?" Now, Catholics don't really, at least at the time, they didn't have that. I didn't really know what that was. But her friend who was inviting us was some sort of, evangelical or Christian that had these things called church lock-ins so that kids could do fun things on weekends, but all be within a space. And it was one of the bigger churches in town, down off of Cuba Avenue in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And they had this church lock-in where we went there, and it's like you lock the doors, and they're going to be there all night. Now, this is like a rectory at a cafeteria area. It's a huge church, and they were playing movies on one side of these bifolding or these doors that are sort of like a accordion shape, and they came and closed. And me and a group of kids were on the altar side, like the church, like where a congregation would sit. And I don't know the right terms because again, I was pretty devoutly Catholic, but I don't know if they're pews, but anyway, we're in that area and we're hanging out. And that's when one person, and I had known that this was happening, not just in the region, but my cousin in San Francisco had told me about it maybe a month or two before, that there was this horrible thing that kids were doing, which is hyperventilation, which is that they would go up and they push their wrists together up against the trachea, the air pipe of the person up against the wall until they passed out. And the person who passed out would have these trips, hallucinations, which I guess was the whole fun of it, is that you'd have this hallucination because you had lost enough air, but not enough to kill you. And of course, I remember at the time there being some sort of news reports about kids are doing this and we got to watch out for this because this is really dangerous. But at the time, the night we were there, I just remember that these kids were doing it and they started doing it. And, they had asked if I wanted to do it. And I said yes. Um, and I said, well, I'll only do it if Sandra does. And now keep in mind, Sandra is the daughter whose mother has sort of brought me in, and Sandra is like helping me open up you might want to say my sacral channel or my sacred channel, my third eye sort of in life. And she's the one, so maybe everything has a symbolic reason. So she's the one who decides she's gonna put her wrists on me. So we're on an altar in a church. Like this thing is so symbolic in hindsight. We're at an altar in a church when the young woman who I'm seeing, who had brought me into her mother's world of healers and stuff like that, she does the hyperventilation against my throat. Now, you're supposed to sort of fall down and kind of within clearly 30 seconds, maybe at most, kind of come out of it. And I didn't. I fell down on the altar floor. And I guess from what I heard afterwards, it had gone minutes, probably beyond 2 or 3 minutes, and I was not breathing or I was not up. And Sandra's friend Heidi Coffin ran to go get an adult to call an ambulance to, I don't know if at the time we had 911, but it's a small little town. So anyway, she was going to yell for her parents to call the ambulance. So she went to that door to call someone. And I heard, after the fact that there was some debate among the kids about how much trouble they get in. Maybe they shouldn't call. And of course, like Sandra's now crying because I haven't woken up yet. Now, this is all post facto what I heard from them later. That was not my experience. My experience was that I was in complete darkness, but I was feeling like I was elevated and rising. Like I don't know how to explain it, but a sort of a darkness was all around it, but also like a being propelled upward. And in that motion of being propelled upward, I started having a very um, clear sense that I was surrounded by, I'll just say persons or people. I was surrounded. There were beings around me. I'm going to say that at the time, I would have probably not used that word. At the time, I would have used people. There's people around me. And I did not get the sense of others have that these are relatives or ancestors or anything like that. I just felt like there's a lot of people around me. But it's very interesting. I did actually get the sense that there were people of different types there. And I'm sure in the time of 1979, 9-year-old David, I would have used the following word, but angels. I think I had the sense at age 9 that there were people around me, and then there were these power beings or different than people mixed in among those other people. And as I'm being propelled, I don't know how space and time works in this motion, but they're somehow around me. And then I sort of like get to one spot where I'm no longer being moved, and they're all now still with me. They're not moving either. And they're all around me. And this in pure blackness, this black figure that's in black figness or silhouette or shadow sort of becomes distinct in that blackness. And I don't know how it works, but some way I was able to discern that in this blackness there was also a great being there that was grand and huge and really like due to the way that dimensionality works in that space was I don't know the right word, like the way we would see a giant or the way that an ant would see a human. Like it was just this grand being sort of making itself distinct. I'm sure I would have gendered it as a 9-year-old as God, but as God, because I was a devout Catholic. I don't know if I do that now, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that it became instantaneously clear that all those people that were around me and maybe some other power beings, they were there to see this. There was not this sense, of course, since then, I'm a PhD, I've read a lot of things. It was not like I've read other people have. I wasn't being welcomed. I wasn't being met by family or ancestors, but there were beings and there were distinctive power beings. And then there was this confrontation or encounter with this really, really, really powerful, grandiose being. And they were there to see what would happen. And I guess the word judgment is obviously very loaded because people think of Judgment Day or something like
Mm,
that. But it wasn't that. The better word would be decision. And the decision was I would not stay there. And I felt that. I felt that at that moment a decision was being made. Or perhaps the whole reason was that I could have this knowledge that this exists. This sort of like this occurred for you to have this moment so that you now know. Now you got to go back. Now you got to go back was like a dagger. It was horrible. I think maybe that's when I started bawling or crying, at least in my soul. I was, I didn't want to go back. I was in a sea that is indistinguishable from me and love and everything else that is love. And the thought of going back and then that sort of reverse momentum was, I think, when I felt myself gasp and realizing I was in a body on an altar. And also, I started bawling hysterically. And I remember some kids running up to me and them calling some other kids back or them perhaps telling the parents, never mind, it's fine now. that was sort of like way like I knew that was going on in the room, but I was a mess. I was crying and bawling because of what I could not stay where I was at. And Sandra was very quickly near me. Now remember, she was this young woman whose mother had sort of, so she was very aware that I had pretty intense childhood and lots of very interesting things happened by this point in my life. So I took her to the side. We went somewhere else inside that big room, and I explained to her that I died. She was familiar with the Monroe book, and I was like, I was not here. You may have seen my body. I was somewhere else, and I told her the experience, and I told her how sad it was to be back, and I really didn't want to be back. And I was still in that very moment saying, I wish I wasn't here. I wish I could go back. And that, that sort of that experience has been obviously incredibly fundamental to someone like me with a couple degrees in religious studies and PhD in history of consciousness, because of course in this world there's so many people who debate whether there's life after death or whether there's particularly intellectuals or people with PhDs or people who are committed to a positive science. Is there even life after death, or what kind of power beings might there be besides humans? And I feel by the age of 14, I knew without a doubt exactly what was possible. It doesn't have to be normal, doesn't have to be standard, but it is possible that these other than human persons can make themselves known and that we can meet them and that we were having, I knew at this age as 14, we were having some sort of physical experience inside these bodies, but that it was not the sum total of what was possible in the world. And shortly after then, keep in mind, I was still like the odd one in school, not incredibly popular, never won an election for a thing. I'm kind of a nerd, but um, I was invited to a kid's house and to a sleepover, a kid from Germany named Bobby Bailey, and he wanted to do this thing. He wanted to do a seance, and I don't know where it came from, but something inside me said, "Oh, I know how to do this. I can make this happen." And I did it, and it worked. And all the kids freaked out, like kids were crying and wanting to go home. And then the word got out that if you invite David, the fat little pudgy kid, to your sleepover, who, was not very popular, he will make the seances work. And I did that I did, I became this kid who would make seances work. And I'd have kids be like, can I stay the night at your house? We should have a sleepover at your house. So I went from like not having many friends. And then my mom's like, you have another sleepover? Like she must have seen me and been like, how are you now becoming popular? But I think that near-death experience, and I think that that childhood opened up something for me so that even as an early teen, I was able to uh, adjust the veils that separate us from the physical world, from the unphysical, from the immaterial world. And that's probably what compelled me once I got 2 years later to college to be in religious studies. I wanted to be in a major that was studying ritual and myth and ceremony. I wanted to be in a major that was looking at why people around the world have different understandings of reality. And I do not regret that at all. I think I chose so wisely because I was able to spend that 5 years for an undergraduate and then 3 years later for a master's really studying religion and religiosity. And in that kind of field, you can really throw yourself into the things that I was invested in, which is better understanding the historical context of things like meditation or shamanism, better understanding the political difficulties of appropriating from other cultures, the politics of identity and indigenous people's claims that a lot of how they see the world are not for non-Indians to take. Like it was a really great education. It's made for a complex life because I'm in a lot of my life to this day still like I'm full professor, like I can't be fired. I am probably closer to retirement than any other major life event. And to this day, I still worry a little bit, because it's like a brainwashing. I still worry about what my colleagues might find out about my actual life. I don't know how many people you have on. with PhDs, but it is a fairly brainwashing experience to
Hmm.
become convinced that there's one way of seeing the world and other ways are not valid.
Yeah. 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 That's an amazing journey. And it's almost like it seems like as you're talking about it, it just kind of like flows and lines up to, like you said, where you are. So it sounds like everything is, the way it was supposed to be. Um, Now, with the going into the darkness, was there the love? Because they do have typical near-death experience hallmarks, what they talk about. Did you experience like the love that they talk about in there, or?
Yeah, I didn't experience love from like I have heard stories in which you have people who are like, oh, my great, aunt or my grandmother, and you would think I'd have that experience with ancestors, considering how important ancestral knowledge is to my childhood. But I didn't know anyone in that space, or at least they didn't make themselves known as family. I think a lot of us from my generation remember a movie with Ellen Bernstein. Do you remember this where she has an out of near-death experience from a car crash and that changes her life and she becomes a healer? Um, and I love that. I loved that movie and I saw it when I was young and it was so formative in helping me understand that. She has that. She has that like ancestral love from all these beings around her when she's in this NDE moment. I didn't get the sense that any one of those individuals was loving me. I had something which may not be unfamiliar. Um, I actually know that there's this, what was it, Netflix show Leslie Keane was involved in a couple of years ago. Leslie, I think it's Keane. Anyway, about people dying. And there was an MD who described it a bit how I experienced it, which was all was love. Love was not discernible from existence. Existence was love. That's how I felt it. That there was not some sort of like, oh, this being was loving me, but the being was love. I was love. We were in a sea of love, molecules of real love. That sort of like experience, which
Mhm.
to me, I mean, it really lines up a bit about why love, which may have different cross-cultural definitions or I teach this Hasidic philosopher Martin Buber a lot. He has a very distinct take on love that I appreciate. But in this case, love was air. It was existence. It was everything. It was everything. Um, and I do think that that's a really key insight. So I studied animal communication last year with a great animal communicator in India. Um, and Priyanka had told me a bit about how um, we often expect there to be this thing that a dog is doing that is what we would call communicating, or cat, or a space. Like you can communicate with landscapes and stuff. Um, but the truth of the matter is that there isn't necessarily an act called communicating at all times. It is more like a state of consciousness that once you start sharing it and or you find it on a frequency level, you don't communicate, you just know. And that is very much lined up against some of the mediums and psychics I've talked with. When I've tried to understand from an academic perspective, were they learning or knowing? I'm sorry, were they knowing because they were clairvoyant, they were seeing something, or clairaudient because they're hearing something? Were they knowing because someone's telling them something, like an angel or a little being? How was knowledge proceeding for them? And some of the best psychics I've ever worked with have said it isn't that anyone's communicating. You just know because it is the truth that you are now in its existence with. And that is much more like what I was experiencing in that near-death experience, where love wasn't an act, it was the state of being
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
that space.
Yeah. And
Maybe,
then knowing, like and I've had that experience. I had a near-death experience and a lot of other experiences as well. And it's like, to me, it's hard to put into words, right? And to term it love as the human love,
yeah,
we all have
yeah,
these conditions based on it, but
yeah.
it's a whole different type of love. Like you can't put any like words really to it. It's just it's very different the way it feels and how I feel it versus how I
Yeah.
can express it. It's a feeling, like
Yeah.
it's a knowing, you know.
Yeah. And I remember, oh my gosh. I mean, I remember, I remember trying to explain that to my mom, like as a 16-year. My mom at some point was like, you are just, you actually, I think she had some psychological struggles because my great great grandmother had sort of this line that went to my great grandmother, then went to me. So I think she had a little thing like she was skipped over somehow. And I've studied this inside the tribe that I worked with, but there's this distinct relationship for them between these sort of abilities and powers and sexual orientation and gender. And I knew as like a 10 or 12-year-old, I think I remember telling my mom or my dad that I like both boys and girls. Like to me, I didn't really understand why we would choose one. And then you could sort of see by the time in college, I'm reading histories of Christianity. I'm studying the sayings of Jesus. I'm looking into document Q, which are all the things that Jesus said. And he never, and this historical figure, Jesus, never like he didn't say more than 22 pages of things in total that we know of, but we don't see him saying much about heterosexuality or gender or anything like that. What you do see are statements about love that are completely without these labels and categories. And I remember telling my mom that I I do love deeply my at the time my best friend who was male and deeply like I couldn't imagine loving anyone more. I also loved my girlfriend and I also loved and I was explaining to her a little bit um how I don't think you really check in with yourself and say, should I, at least a lot of us don't check in with yourself to say, should I feel this thing? I remember in 10th grade, I was dating like this black girl for a while. And I remember my stepfather thinking, wow, this is so bold of you. No, it wasn't bold of me. You just do what you feel, right? Then I dated a girl with multiple sclerosis after that. And, I've been with both genders in my life or sexual orientation in my life. Um, and it's just never been one of those things where I ask myself if this is the right way to act on the love that I feel. If I feel the love or the attraction, then it's there. These lessons are cosmic for a lot of us. And then for some of us, I guess they're fairly academic or they read about them or they come to them later in the life. That's actually one of the biggest lessons I think as I get older, I realize I think it's probably when you reached out to me. I said, I don't know if I feel comfortable all the time saying what I think the world is because I'm trying to step back a little bit from this missionary perspective that other people should live their life. What I've come to in the last decade is because I teach classes on alien psychics and ghosts. I literally most of my students are STEM, science, technology, engineering, math at University of California, LA. They are not generally believers. They're coming in to hear mediums and psychics debunked. And what they end up getting is this sort of professor who's like, well, some of them are bunk, but some of them aren't. And every community has someone who's trying to make money off of other people. And every community has liars. Like this is not a problem in the world of spirituality. It's just part of being the human creatures that we are. Um, and I would say to them that if you're not called to this, if you don't see it, if it doesn't speak to you, if you don't understand it viscerally, and you're not attracted to understand it, you're not pulled to understand it, it didn't land on your, Instagram feed, the algorithm isn't giving it to you, then it's okay. No, I'm not here to make you think this is how you should live your life. I think actually you're probably living your existence exactly how you're supposed to right now in this
Mhm.
form that you're in. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think that we all are, no matter what, even if we argue against something. Because life is a lesson, that's how I look at it. And we
Yeah.
learn, and we go through the experiences and we have the beliefs and the perceptions and what are our likes and our dislikes and, our
Yeah. Well,
preferences.
you've been doing this longer than I have in terms of like a public facing acknowledgement of the world that you live in. did that take a while to get to, or are you a more bold? I think I may have said to you before we started recording, the academic world is very brainwashing. You get really self-conscious because the whole entire profession is based on what other people think of you and your peer review, that sort of thing. Were you just an out person who decided, I'm going to have this YouTube channel and do interviews and I don't care what people think, or did you wrestle with it at all?
Um, I'm actually an introvert.
Oh, and you're doing a podcast interview where you're out making all these videos. Interesting. See, if I
Yeah,
were you, I think I'd be afraid of the comments. I try not to read the comments, but just in
yeah,
some ways, I have a lot of respect for people who are like, well,
yeah,
this is the world I live in, and I'm just going to be honest about it.
yeah. I honor everybody's thoughts, because that's their journey. I'm not one to tell people to do or believe in anything that they want to. They have to experience it for themselves. I just share my knowledge, my wisdom, and help others share their experience. And like you said, if it falls on your algorithm on social media and it costs you, then
Yeah,
for you.
I think that's fantastic. Well, it's a really
Yeah,
great channel. I've been
thank
enjoying
you.
learning about all the guests that you've had on.
Thank you. Um, Now, I did want to kind of circle back to you said that it was your grandmother, great grandmother.
Great grandmother.
Hmm. You said that for viewers, in case they're asking, you said that she put it in you. What did she put in you? Like
Oh yeah,
so
yeah.
their minds don't go circling around. What did they put in?
Yeah, that's a very good
Yeah.
question. Yeah, it was my great great grandmother actually who had that sort of like transference, or at least that's what I might call it these days, where she showed it to me later and said, you don't have to worry, put it in you. It's very fascinating. So in these classroom situations where I have full, packed rooms of students and we're reading about psychics or reading about mediums, or we're looking at people who've experienced the visionary episteme, like, people who have been on Vision Quest, or people who have had very, powerful, and, of course, they're college students, so they always want to talk about psychotropics and, plant medicines and like drugs and of course we go down that path, and we also talk a lot about meditation and interdimensionality. And this thing comes up where it's why them? Why would someone have psychic ability? Now, I don't come out in my classrooms and say who I am. I guess it's interesting to me. Many of them don't even just Google to figure out, how complex my life is. So they see me as just academic professor. But I've often wondered this, like, why me? There was a time where I was doing, there was a time in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was a student at Arizona State University. And I'd been visiting a lot of psychics and mediums, and there came a point where one of them said, "Can I give your number to someone?" And I was like, "Why?" And she was like, "Well, I just think you'd really be able to help him." And I was like, "Why?" And she's like, "Because come on now, you can do this. You don't need me. You should be doing this. And I think it's time. So I want to send you one of my clients." And I was like, "Oh my God." So this is like 24-year-old David Shorter is like, I just want to focus on school. Like, school's hard. I didn't get a great childhood education. I don't come from a highly literate family. And now, I'm waiting tables or I'm bartending. I'm also partying. I also want to be a kid. And now it's really heavy stuff. And and it made me start feeling like I was going a little crazy. And how can I be in this world and in this other world too, where people might see me as capable of helping them and having some sort of, at that time was clairvoyance with them, and some sort of psychic knowledge of the world, or the world of the immaterial, that sort of thing. It was an intense time. And so I asked myself, why me? And students in my classes go, why do certain people have it? So this is a long-winded answer to your question. I think for some people it is a lineage. I think things are passed down. I think it's I've seen it in the alien abductee community. I've seen it in some ways in you might want to say, the evolutionary biology community, having to do with genetics, and perhaps even the way that people are now looking at the way that diseases and trauma runs in families. It's starting to make sense to me that also wouldn't skill sets and gifts be running through families, and maybe what we would want to call callings. So I try to help my students understand that some people have these abilities because they went on a vision quest. Sometimes they're captivated in a way that I literally mean like that root of the word. They were captivated because some plant being came out of their ayahuasca trip. And some of these some people have ability, and I won't say I'm out of this category, though I know it's not the purpose of this conversation. But I also suffered a childhood trauma that was pretty severe. Some people's childhood trauma cracks the sacred egg for them, and then they have this ability from that point on. And I mean more than just simply like they were sexually abused by a family member, and so they're highly intuitive and great at reading energies or intentions. I think that is possible too.
Mhm.
I'm also saying that there's multiple paths to these lives that some of us are leading. And for me, it seems to be that I cannot dismiss the fact that one of the most primary fundamental experiences was my great great grandmother saying to me in a visionary state while she was deceased within a week in my bedroom to me, I put something in you and you're going to have it when you need it. And I needed it. I needed it at various times. Um, and if we could just go there, like I don't know if you ever had this, I'm sure you've had so many different types of conversations because your channel is very deep. I got into a PhD program that was way above my intellectual ability. It's called the History of Consciousness. It's at UC Santa Cruz. It had a more difficult acceptance rate to get into than Yale and Harvard combined. It's very rigorous, and I don't really know how I landed into it, but I got into it, and I knew it was going to be tough. Because like I said, small rural town education. I've still at this point in my life never taken a geography class. I could barely tell you the 50 states. Like, and I get into this really intense PhD program, which is with one of the like leading scholars in the world has decided to work with me, and he is known for being a rigorous positivist and objectivist. And here I am with spooky stuff going on. So my then girlfriend and I moved there to Santa Cruz, and I'd known pretty quickly I can't do this. I can't have psychic clients. I can't have interdimensional visitors at night when I'm trying to study, but also when I'm trying to become someone who is intellectually and mentally committed to rationality and positivism. And I have to prove myself to get through this program, or I will end up with over $100,000 of student debt and no job. So the stakes, of course, you and I now know that my soul didn't just choose this accidentally, right? Like
Mhm. Yep.
this was the journey, right?
Yeah.
So I was in 2000, I'm sorry, 1996. Most of your audience is probably like the 1900s. Oh my God. But in 1996, I essentially said to the world, please take it away from me. I don't want this anymore. I'm in this situation now where I can't deal with it. It's making me feel crazy. And I stopped seeing things and I stopped dreaming things and I stopped knowing things about people when I meet them. Um, it was like frankly, it was really enjoyable. It was like I could just be a 26-year-old and drink and have fun with friends and not be overly deep about things and not worry about, you know, all the stuff that I had worried about before. It's interesting, this life, and I'm sure you had it and your guests have had it, where I didn't feel fully myself if I wasn't engaged in a spiritual practice, but I also felt sometimes like I wasn't enough in the material world. And it was really good to be fully in the material world for a while. I say that. It's hilarious. I've never put this together before. I say that, but then within 2 years, I become a practicing Buddhist who meditates 2 times a week for 3 hours each time and start working with the person who was the ghostwriter for the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. So essentially, I'm still pretty spooky and freaky, but I'm just, but I'm doing it in a sort of methodical practice in a very
Mhm.
like rigorous practice way. And I do not mean just like left coast light Buddhist. I shaved my head. I was vegan. I was in it. Um, Fast forward, I am about ready to finish my PhD. And I must have said, when I asked the world to take it away from me, I must have said or intended, without knowing, take it away from me first so I could get this PhD, because I was um, June 11th, 2002. I was printing out my dissertation to take it into the university library the next morning. It was like 11 at night. It was probably 11:11. But like I'm printing it out, and it's like I'm watching the printer produce 300, 400 pages of like, and it's just becoming this thing, you know? It's like, oh my God. It's like this life journey. Graduate school is a real a messed up thing, but it's also people choose it for sole reasons. And here it wasn't coming into fruition. Like I said, maybe I told the universe with my thoughts, please take this away from me so that I could get the PhD. But essentially, with that document there, I was going to be a PhD the next morning. And I went to bed that night. And in the middle of the night, I woke up because I felt someone sit on the edge of my bed. And my eyesight adjusted, and there was a guy sitting on the edge of my bed. And I'd known, even though it hadn't happened for 5 or 6 years, I'd known instantaneously this was an immaterial person. This was a person, but they were in a material form. But I could see them, like, you know, receding hairline. I could see them distinctly, like they're a person.
Mhm. Yeah.
And they have weight. I felt my bed go and like by my knees, like, and this person's just sitting there and staring at me. And it had been 6 years, and I thought I had left that world, the other world. I thought I'd gone away from it. And I was like, oh my gosh, a little freaked out. Um, I'm sure, I'm sure this is not real. Like I fell into my old pattern of being afraid of something that I knew to be true. I'm sure this is pretty normal. Anyway, I did that whole sort of thing, like I'm gonna roll over, and I'm sure you're not gonna be there when I get back. But I roll over, and then I can still feel him there, and I turn around, and he's definitely there. So So then I get up. I literally have to move my legs away from him to get out of bed because I'm afraid of hitting him. And I walk across the room and I go to the studio. It's a studio. So I just walk into the walk toward the bathroom where I could be at the bathroom, and I turn on the lights to the bathroom, and I turn around and he's still there. And so then I like splash cold water into my face, and I look at him and he's still there. And I say to him, just, okay. I now realize I'm finishing my PhD. It's all turning on again, isn't it? It's going to turn on, isn't it? This is what this is about, right? And he just smiles, and a little trickle of blood comes out of his head and comes down off the elbow and falls off his cheek. And I freak out, and I close the door to the bathroom, because in all my life up to that point, I had never seen anything bloody or grotesque. It was never like Sixth Sense. It was never how they die or anything. It was always how people projected their physical manifestation for the purposes of being seen. It was never anything like that. And then I thought, in that moment, oh my God, not only is it back, but now it's back and it's weirder or it's difficult or something like that. So talk about mythic journeys. The next morning, I was there to essentially submit my dissertation, and I wasn't going to stay in the city. I was going to go back to. I think I'd gotten a postdoc in Connecticut, so I was getting ready to move to Connecticut. I was just there to submit the dissertation, but I wanted to see the woman I moved to Santa Cruz, who I was dating, who I was no longer dating. We had had a lunch date to see each other and catch up. Now, this woman, because I'd been with her for years during the time in which I had moved from Phoenix to Santa Cruz 6 years earlier, she knew me deeply. She herself was she's now one of the, like, I think, foremost naturopaths and herbalists. But anyway, we had brunch. So I drove to the university. I turned in my dissertation. I'm officially like a PhD. I drive to meet her, and we're at this Italian little place in on like Ocean or Mission Boulevard in Santa Cruz, California. And I tell her, I go, Shala, I have to tell you what happened last night. It was the most intense thing I've ever. I saw something, and she was like, she had known me from when we broke up 5 years before, 6 years before. She was like, but none of that's really new. And I'm like, no, Shala, I haven't. I asked it all to go away. It went away. I haven't had any of these things happen. And then I have this person, and then there's this blood up that comes down and it hits his eyebrow, and then it rings to the side of the elbow, and then it falls off his cheekbone. Like all of this is all very specific. And she was just like, I don't know, maybe it's coming back to you. I don't know. And we finish our brunch and we walk outside to the parking lot and we give each other hugs. It's so good to catch up. I want to come back. I want to meet your fiance. Like we gotta stay in touch. We never did. But you have these like, oh, it was so nice to see you. And then she gets in her car and it doesn't start. And I was like, do you need me to call someone? She's like, no. She's like, actually, I only live like 2 blocks away. Do you want to give me a drive? Because do you want to drive me? Because I got to get to work within like half an hour. I'm like, no problem. Of course, in hindsight, nothing happens accidentally. So
Mm.
she gets in my car and we drive out of the parking lot, and there's a truck there that is stopping sort of traffic from going by it because before in front of it is a accident, and there's a police officer on a motorcycle, or he's a motorcycle police officer with a helmet and everything, but he's off his bike and he's standing there and he's trying to get traffic moved over, and a car coming the opposite direction doesn't see him and it hits him, and he flies into the air and he lands and his helmet rolls off of his face. And Shala and I we're the car right there. So we're the first persons closest to him. And we both immediately get out of the car and we both run to the body. And there's this white guy with a receding hairline laying on the ground. And the blood comes off and hits his eyebrow and comes off the cheek and falls onto the pavement. He's on his back. So it's like, he was literally what I described to her
Mm.
35 minutes before at lunch. And it was what I was describing had happened the night before of the same man who sat on the edge of my bed. Now, at the time, I had a life coach, the woman, Kriya, who had worked on Tibet looking and dying, and we meditated a lot together. So I immediately called her and I said, I got to see you because she was obviously, ironically, or not coincidentally, not ironically, that's not the right word. I'm coincidentally in Santa Cruz, where all these people are connecting me to the life I had and when I had moved out of Santa Cruz. So I go talk to her. This is really a long story, a long narrative and answer to like, do I think that she put something into me, or why do I think these things happen? And I guess in some ways it's that I think also it's unavoidable. I asked for it to go away. There's no reason why it shouldn't have. It should have just stayed away from me, unless the universe is listening and it really heard that I wanted it to go away for a bit. And now I think I have yet to read the book written by a psychic or a medium that says that these things ebb and flow. They are waves. Sometimes you feel incredibly connected. Sometimes you feel plugged in. Sometimes you're seeing things left and right, and you know incredibly what their mythic or symbolic value is to how you're crafting knowledge in your life. And sometimes it's not going on. And sometimes you don't know what's going on. And that's a challenge with a lot of people, particularly as I work inside the entertainment industry. People will say like, oh, how could you not have known X, Y, or Z if you allegedly have it? I'm like, well, you don't, that's not how it works. And I've, like I said, I've got 10 or 12 psychics who I've interviewed, I've recorded them, I talked to their clients for this project I'm working on. Some of them are divorced. Some of them are financial trouble. Like some of them have health problems. Your life doesn't stop being your life inside this material condition that we're sharing just because you have these things that have happened to you. Perhaps like your great great grandmother's putting something in you, or you having your sacred egg cracked, that sort of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I think I would agree that it does get transferred down just like anything else,
Uh,
illnesses, diseases, anything and everything, cycles, behaviors, you name it. Everything gets passed down. We're taking up the body that was before us and their experiences and everything. And I feel like, we all have the ability to be intuitive and we have certain abilities
You
that are
think
open.
everyone has that ability?
Hmm.
I love that.
Yeah.
Students ask me that all the time. One of the ways that I've found it possible to be in this complex world is to say often when I don't know something. So I'm one of those professors who always like, I don't know. I just don't know. Sorry, I don't know. And that's a very common question. Hey, Professor Shorter, can I increase my ability? What, and I've heard that there are schools and programs that do that, but I'm always like, I don't know. I don't know. I know that my ability has been its strongest when I throw myself into it with like the Fool tarot card, when I just jump.
Hmm.
There was a time in COVID when I just didn't know what the world is. Why are we in this pandemic? What is going on? Why are we quarantined? What is going on? What is the humanitarian what on the humanity level is happening? We were in such a weird, political situation. There were like riots in the street in LA, like it was intense. And I got to a point where I just didn't care anymore about things. Like I didn't worry about what people had said. And I started just telling, people that, yeah, I'd take an appointment. And so I started giving psychic readings. No one could leave their house. Well, at least in LA, we were in a pretty tight quarantine for a while. And in the academic world, it was very conservative on that sort of level. So we were pretty much in our house doing all our remote work. I started being booked. I mean, I never really took more than three or four clients. Every day I had an opening. I mean, it was becoming so that I was, I was as good as some of the top amazing psychics that I've been interviewing. Like I was instantaneously full of knowledge or channel. I was at the level of borderline channeling. When you're like you're so in it that you could sort of just get out of the way.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And
I
then
think too, like there's like free will. Like you said, you said you didn't want it, and whether that was for that spirit, that part of time of in your life, you know,
yeah.
it was okay. He doesn't want this right now, and I think
Yeah.
you have a say in it too, because like a lot of times I have where I'm in. My intention is to do the work, right? And to get in and
Right.
do Reiki or healing or channeling
Right.
or psychic work or sessions. But then there's also times where I'm just going about my day and I'm like, okay, I heard what this person was thinking, or I'm having dreams about like COVID, right? I had
Yeah.
all the dreams about COVID or like life situations,
Yeah.
information will come in, but I'm not having that intention to be connected to receive,
Right.
but I am open. And I think it's maybe just this a layer where we're either connected but we can still receive if we're in the moment where they can get the information in. Do you know what I mean? Because
Absolutely.
I've had a lot of different experiences in different ways without setting the intention. I never asked for my abilities to be open. They were just there. Like,
As a child?
hmm I heard people breathing and walking and I sensed them. And as a
Huh.
child, and I've had all these experiences and yeah.
Do you feel do you feel like I want to go back to this thing that you said where you said that it does follow in lines like diseases, like behaviors, and then you said a phrase there like we are getting these bodies. Can I ask you to expand on that a little more? Like, do you think I don't know. I obviously know a wide range of takes, but I have this rare opportunity to learn from you.
So
Are you one of those people who think that our souls see everything that this life is going to entail and they choose it? Like that some part of us chose our struggles and chose our families and chose our challenges?
So, from my near death experience and
Mhm.
everything that's happened over, everything has led up to that understanding. So, I do channel a lot of information, and that's how it comes to me. And
Mm.
then, from what I've experienced on the other side, as souls, we come in, we take up the body, everything is here already. And
Huh.
the soul dips in to the life and lives the life. It's already here.
Huh.
We don't have to create it. It's already done. Right.
Huh.
And I just did a channeling on that the other day about how we are actually, as a soul, the seed that's been planted into the earth, bring heaven to earth. Right. So
Oh,
channeling information into this realm, if you want to call it a realm, this consciousness, because everything's a consciousness. Um,
right,
and we just live the lives in the body. A lot of people, when we come in, we have the amnesia, right? So we're connected to the identity, ego, and think that we're the body because we are
right,
in the body, our consciousness, like we're projecting the consciousness in here that plays part in the role in this realm, which appears to be real. And though it is real, it's actually not real, but it is for the play.
right,
It's
right. It's
consistent.
that's why there's some truth to the theories that we're living in a hologram or that we're creating this. In a way, we are because we're
Mhm.
projecting our consciousness into a material reality. So does that mean because you said it's already physical, it already exists, and the soul's coming in, that for you, there's also some truth to like the Akashic record that everything that has ever happened is already known and we can tap into
It's all
that too?
written. Yep. It's all
Wow.
already written.
So is your
You know
channeling
the story and the answer. You just haven't lived it yet.
so so when you say you channel, it's not I think I have a very limited no, I read one book called The Channeling Zone where it felt like what they were saying is that a person and then I've met people who channel and they have a direct relationship to a being or a person or a great animal who lived at one point. When you say channel, you don't seem to be directing it to some sort of individual or being. You're saying you're channeling from the realm.
Mhm. From the
Wow.
higher realm.
And did you have to learn, or did someone? Because I'm very interested in this woman who was my friend's mother. I mean, I often, so some students will be like, well, if we don't have the, how are some people like this? Or some people, and I have to explain to them, particularly when I'm teaching them something about indigenous culture. The world is different when you're raised with so much knowledge about something that there are multiple terms for it and there's category like we just think there's things called dreams, but for people who actually are in the world of dreams, we know there's like multiple types of dreams and it all depends on all these sort of categories. And the same is true about like communities or cultures that have power beings. Like in the tribe that I worked with, there's like 5 or 6 different ways you could be a healer depending on which one you have. And the person I worked with had this thing called Maria, which means he was good at a thing or a particular thing. Like there are ways in which you could be raised and be fostered. I was fostered into a home where this dreaming stuff was not weird. It was actually fertilized. I was raised in a family where I was allowed to be, and also I had someone there to shepherd me. And then I had a friend's mom sort of maybe take on the role of apprentice. Did you have that? Were you fortunate enough to have someone at some point help you understand this channeling from that realm and the ways that you stepped into it?
Um, so I kind of just stumbled on it.
Mm,
Um, I didn't really have somebody to teach me because for me, before any of this, because it started with the dark night of the soul, and then the near-death experience happened, and then a lot of out of body and a lot of other experiences happened. But I kind of just stumbled on it. I was working at like an addiction center. I was a mental health tech.
mm,
And during the times when they were in groups getting counseling or, they were eating or wherever the case might be, they were sleeping, napping, I would sit down and I would just start drawing. And
mm.
all of a sudden, it was like the pen just started moving
Yeah. Automatic handwriting. Yeah.
automatically. And so it was like an automatic writing process. And then as I just started doing it, when I first started, it kind of scared me, but I was like, it wasn't really saying anything bad or negative, so
Right.
I just allowed it. And at some point, years later, I think it was like 4 or 5 years ago, like I had like stacks and stacks of paper of like frequency, consciousness, all kinds of stuff that I was just receiving. I didn't know where it was coming from, but and I was like, okay, what am I supposed to do with all this stuff, right? And I was taking a walk on the beach because I lived on Clearwater Beach, and nobody was around. And this voice, it was like I don't want to say God or source or whoever, but it was very like a masterful voice that said,
Mm,
you were meant to write. So write.
mm,
Yeah,
mm.
no. So, and I've been writing, and a lot of things just come through. All I have to do is sit here now at this point because I've been doing it for so long and then just let it flow and it comes in. So I've
Yeah.
been writing, but I haven't really had anybody to like, you know, train
Right.
me or be a guide for me or anything like that. It just kind of happened for me.
Well, yeah, I guess it's like an ability that you're being told you have. Like it's not something that I also think these things are so distinctly ours. People want to associate some skill or talent with it being one thing, but it's actually moves differently in all of us. Like I've met so many people who like their thing is this one thing. Like this, like how weird is it that at some point in my life, I people would tell me what they're struggling with, and I would have an answer for them 3 to 4 days later after sleeping on it and looking at my dreams. That's a very weird thing. You can't charge someone for 50 minutes of a session. Like that's not what I was doing at that time. I think that was like 33 and 34. I had this weird practice. But what's so interesting about the universe is that once you put it out there, they come. Like people will find you if the thing that they need is the thing that you're doing at that time. There's been moments where I've been like, God, no one's asking for any readings or something like that. And then at some point, I won't even say it out loud. I'll just think to myself, yeah, I feel it. I feel it on. I should take some clients. And then oddly, you'll start getting texts and phone calls. And you didn't even, it's the moment, it's like that thing. It's the reverse of what I said when I was 26. I wanted to go away. You have the free will. You have
Mhm.
the ability. That's part of the agreement, I think, of being human, is that you get this free will. And people don't know how to make sense of, well, how do you have the free will if it's already been done and you just don't know the ending? Like, how is that free will? And I try to tell students all the time, there's multiple paths and you can take multiple routes. You're still going to have these benchmark soul moments that you are
Mhm.
contracted to have that you may have chosen. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, and I think too, like as long as we're open to it, we're going to receive, the information or the guidance. When I look back on my life, I see points where people showed up
Mm,
in my life, and it was like just random. We would go camping, and
mm,
like every summer, and there would be this Native American girl that would show
mm,
up,
mm.
and it was really interesting. Like we were not so anywhere around where there would be Native Americans, right?
Interesting.
Upstate New York, where we were at. But she would be there. And I'm like, okay, this was interesting. She became like my friend on the
Mm,
summers. And it was interesting because then she showed up at my one school for a little bit and then she disappeared. And later on, I realized that I had, I don't know if you're in or understand or into like past lives. I realized that in a past life scenario, being a
mm,
Native American. And so
mm.
that was playing a part in this role in this life uh, because I had to learn something about a situation
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
occurred in that lifetime, which a lot of things bled into this lifetime from past lives, which
Yeah.
I
There's
had
this
to go
great book
through.
called Amerindian Rebirth, in which it looks at cross tribal, so multiple tribal stories and histories and ethnographic reports of reincarnation. There's even in the Pacific Northwest, I think it's among the Kwakiutl, there's like a whole entire kinship where they literally have mapped out who you are based on where you're born and who that other person was and who you're related to. So they can like you're born and they can take you to like who your ancestors were that are still living from that family. It's really amazing. I did not sign up for reincarnation stuff. I'd have to say that as a person who was, invested in these conversations at a very early age and then chose a profession where I'm completely in them all the time. I mean, even 20s, 30s, 40s, I always was like, I don't know about reincarnation. I don't know about reincarnation. I don't know about, and people were talking about death and dying and ghosts and UFOs. But when it came to reincarnation, I was like, I don't know. Then I went to a channeler after my mom died. Someone had told me about this great channeler in LA. And in LA, that could mean they're an hour away. Or, because it's just a big city. It's just 12 million people in the county. And people would be like, oh, I know this psychic. And you're like, oh my gosh, that person, I would never drive there. But then when the person gave me their address, it was like less than a mile from my house, which is fantastic. You're like, oh, wow, okay. And also, my mom had died and I hadn't heard from her. I hadn't seen her. There was no sign. And I felt nothing. When I put my feelers out, I couldn't find her. in the cosmos, in the universes, in the multiple worlds that exist. I couldn't find her. And I thought, well, that was interesting. So you and your listeners not might hate the next thing that I say, but I used a burner phone. I used a fake name. I went to a channeler, and there's still that academic in me that's like, I don't want them to Google me. I don't want them to know anything about me, right? So I show up. They, from all I know, they don't know my real name, whatever, stuff like that. And this woman says, "Okay, I'm gonna start, and then you're gonna hear from Torah. She's a woman, but she channels this male figure, Torah. Sean Randall, by the way, is amazing here in LA. And and Torah, says, what state are you here to connect with someone? And I said, yes. And he said, who is it? And I said, my mom. And he says, what area or region did she die in? It's like, this is such an interesting question. I was like, Southwest United States, New Mexico. Okay, I found her. And then he says, so is this how she died? And then he describes her death perfectly for like the 6 months of her slow passing. And then he says, she doesn't exist right now. She's back at source. So she doesn't exist as an individualized identity, which is why I couldn't find her. Why
Mm.
I couldn't use my shark senses to figure out where she was in the cosmos, because she was no longer an individualized soul out there. She wasn't waiting like some people. She wasn't waiting for the next life. She wasn't reconstituted or reincarnated as someone yet. This was very fascinating. So it was interesting because I was so doubtful about the channeling experience that I didn't do the most basic psychic 101 thing, which is I didn't take in questions, right? I didn't prepare. I didn't think it was going to be good or anything, right? So then, like after 40 minutes, Tora says, do you have any questions for me? And I was like, there I am, a PhD who's been studying this stuff for decades. I was a little like a very beginner mind. I was like, I was like, well, if everything you say is true, there's reincarnation. And he was like, duh, like, of course, right? Like everything, of course. I was like, well, then if that's true, tell me something about a previous life, anything of mine that would give me insight into my current life. And he was like, just instantaneously. He was like, oh, well, you're an academic because you chose to crawl your way back into an elite group of people who consider themselves knowledge makers, because in a previous life you were in London, a city I have deep affinity for and feel like I'm home whenever I'm there. Like the very first time I went to London, I applied for a job within 3 weeks. It felt that home to me. He said, you were in London and you were a doctor, and you had this theory about diseases being not connected to a physical thing like a germ or a thing, but rather you were trying to push people to understand the immateriality. And that is why you are still a professor, deeply afraid of being judged, deeply afraid of being kicked out, because they kicked you out of their secret society of doctors because they thought your theories were that outlandish. And that's why you've chosen to still be an academic who's really worried about what people think about you, because you're afraid that your insider group is going to judge you for it. And I think for all the ways I may have doubted channeling or reincarnation before, after that session, it was such a deep, deep psychological insight to something that had been driving me and motivating me for my life, that I was able to just drop it instantaneously and create a website where I am who I am and I'm not lying anymore, and do what you want with it, you know?
You have to be who you are.
Yeah.
Regardless, we can always have look for validation or
Yeah.
acceptance from others. And I love the part where you had said that she was actually back to source. And that was shown to me in one of my
Oh,
channelings, where at some point we do stop doing the reincarnation, and we do become the one, one with source. But also at the same time, like the other thing that came in that when you were talking to share was that like we can learn anything and all things here, right? We don't really have to
Oh, interesting.
channel and everything,
Interesting.
because like if okay, so take the topic of reincarnation. Look at a
Yeah.
flower.
Yeah.
What does a flower do? It
Yeah.
reincarnates
Yes.
itself, right?
Mhm.
You plant a seed, it grows, it dies, and a seed plants again, and it
Yeah.
recycles. Everything is here in plain sight, only we don't see it. We don't, everything is transparent. We've been taught and shown everything. And we
Yes.
choose to see something different, but it's all here if we want to see it and look at it. We just have to, what they say, like you eat the apple from the tree. You have to
Yeah.
become
Yeah.
awake to see it from
Yeah.
our unconsciousness,
Yeah,
right?
that's incredibly insightful, Laura. I mean, you're giving me a moment right now that's a gift. It reminds me, as you get older, you don't oftentimes put yourself in the role of a student. I mean, maybe people do who decide they're going to go get, their Reiki training or something like that. But when I decided to become more proficient as an animal communicator and started that, I'm a student again, and it was like real work. There was like homework and exercises, and it was every week and for months. And I mean, that's probably my retirement plan actually. Like I plan on living I have to, I just know it's coming, a place with really tall trees, mountainous area, and I will be an animal communicator. I can tell you that's a truism about my world, even though it's not here yet, and it's probably years away. Um, I just remembered something I've never thought of before. I remember being like a 5-year-old and telling my mom that I could understand the dog. I never had that thought before, just this very second. And there was something about you saying what you said that made it emerge for me on a conscious level. But anyway, when you talk to animals, by which I mean the ground squirrels or the birds and the animals that are around you, they talk the way you just talk, Laura. It is sometimes so simple. It is sometimes so evident when said a certain way where you're like, oh my God, we make things so complex. We make things so dogs do not have that sort of complexity, and which is why I love hearing from them. But also most of the animals that I've been fortunate to learn from, or plants even, they don't make things so hard for themselves the way we do. It's it's almost embarrassing that we've gotten to this point. I wrote an academic paper once about the problem with seeing ourselves as being capable of encountering intelligent life on other planets. And I problematize all the sort of standards of evaluation that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence is using. And one of them is that we are an advanced intellectual or intelligent society. And I was like, but is that really true? I feel like that's a truism. If anything, we're becoming less intelligent, which is based right in this very moment where you can say about how we don't really need all these things because the truth is in front of us all the time. The natural world is just showing us the
Mhm.
reality of our capabilities
Yep.
and our possibilities for joy, and we just make it so hard. We make it so hard on ourselves. Thank you for sharing that. You did something right there that was really insightful for me.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Glad I could help.
Mhm.
um, yeah, and talking about like maybe beyond here a little bit. I know you have some things on your website there. Like you have a documentary, Cutting the Cord, and you do talk about aliens, which is kind of big right now. A
It
lot
is.
of people are talking about aliens. Um,
Yeah, we're having a moment.
yeah, and I kind of say like for me, I mean, there's no way that there couldn't be any. I mean,
All right.
if you look at us as yeah, we're people here, humans spinning
Yeah.
in the middle of the universe, out in the middle of nowhere, in the
Yeah.
darkness, on a
Right.
planet, in form, and we have planes, we have rockets,
Yeah.
and if they're being that they're we can't be just the only ones here. I mean,
Right.
it's common sense, right? I
Right.
mean, and for them to look at us, with rockets, with planes, they're probably looking at us like we're aliens.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
I mean, and somebody that kind of came to me too, because somebody had told me one time, I said to somebody, I was like, I love your accent. And she's like, well, you have an accent too. And I was like, oh, like I didn't really realize I was not self-conscious about having an accent until she brought it to my awareness. Right. And
Right.
so now I use that philosophy, how is it somebody else looking inward at me? Right? Looking through an
Right.
outside version. And so if somebody outside of us, aliens are looking at us, we're aliens to them,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, the alien thing is interesting it's a fantastic tool to teach with because it teaches us some core issues about otherness and how we other beings. Because I study colonialism and I study the way that indigenous people have really truly never been encountered or understood on their own terms, I've become a consultant in some ways to people who are interested in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence because of the deep history of colonialism that I know of cultures contacting each other on this planet. So we have a pattern of contacting cultures, and we can look at it to learn about future contact. That's all intellectual and academic. But this entire conversation has proceeded between you and me about my lineage on my mother's side, which is my grandmother, my great grandmother, and my great great grandmother. The whole reason I was living with my great grandmother is because my father was working top secret for the government on UFO related projects. So I have I have this whole other side to me, which is that since I was, well, he got the job when I was 9, when everything started getting weird in my life on the other stuff. He started doing secret work out in the deserts of New Mexico on UFO crash site and retrieval and reverse engineering. So I had known since 9 or 10 that we had ships crashing here or landing here, that the highest levels of our government knew that in many cases were not human made. So the existence of there being people who could pilot those or beings who could pilot those ships to me was never in question. So yeah, I have this whole UFO thing, which is that um, I've been very fortunate to be in spaces with abductees. And in LA, it's very, there's a lot of people who circulate through this network. So I can bring people into my classrooms who are either high up in the world of disclosure, which is why we're so in this particular moment politically right now, is because we're seeing the way disclosure works, the government disclosing what it knows and what it's been researching, which is different than what it knows, but what it's been researching or been struggling with. And the fact that this is happening at this very historic moment to me is really fascinating because I'm seeing people who, particularly on social media platforms, are trying to reconcile, a UFO as a sort of ship that is material and takes passengers or pilots or extraterrestrials from one dimension to another or across physical space. But you're also seeing this sort of overlap with conversations about light and frequencies and orbs and what is communication. So I'm kind of living for it. I'm loving it right now because even though to me I'm not but I'm not blown away by what I've known to be true since 9 or 10. What I am fascinated about is how this will then help people expand their horizons conceptually and recognize that, every notion that we've been shown, almost without exception, there's probably two or three exceptions to this. Aliens are shown in material form very much like humans with appendages and a central nervous system with a head that sits on top of a physical body. And part of me thinks like, well, if you can get to a point where you recognize how intelligent crows are and octopuses and you can recognize that in fact not all living beings are human, then you can get out of this human exceptionalism, which has put us in this role of extracting from the earth, ignoring animal intelligences, and perhaps then recognizing that there are also immaterial beings. And so for someone who's now invested in the conversation we've been having for like, an hour now, I feel like that itself could open a door to us recognizing, well, if the existence as we knew it is different on a physical level, meaning that there are not just living beings on this earth, then perhaps we could also conceptually get around issues like temporality and immateriality. So then the world might slowly become more open to understanding how our ancestors are around us and
Mhm.
how there are beings who are not physical who share some of our physical plane sometimes. And we can acknowledge them and recognize them as being not just sentient in an intellectual level, but also caring. Like they care for us, and there's care that we can owe them back. When you're in Indonesia, you've been to Bali or to Indonesia, and you see like the families that put out the food in the morning for the spirits or the
Yeah.
ants. And this happened with the tribe that I worked with in Mexico. There's such a regular acknowledgement of the beings around them who need to be attuned to and cared for and respected, but also that we can share with them knowledge and power and healing ability. That's the thing that this particular historic moment is interesting to me about because I've got people who've come to my class who who know that there are aliens because they had some sort of ayahuasca experience in which a plant being showed themselves to them and then told them, the human, the person who's coming to my class, that the plant world is aware of the non-earthlings being. And you're just like, you can imagine how fun my classes are.
They sound fun. Yep, definitely. Yeah.
Well, I get
Yeah.
this opportunity to have 16, 17 to 21-year-olds at a particular moment where they're just recognizing for themselves that they might not think the way their parents do, and they
Mhm.
can be open to seeing new things in the world. So I'm very fortunate on that level.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I don't even know, like, as far as, UFOs, aliens, I know I've met people
Mhm.
who, yeah, they look like me, you, anybody else that's walking around in this human suit, but they have a different energy. They have a
Oh,
different frequency. It's like they are aliens in human form. Now, I don't really know like the depths to where this actually goes and what they're going to share, what they're not going to share, what they're hiding, or everything that's gone on. But I've sensed where people were like, okay, this is
yeah.
definitely different.
Yeah. So my dad, who did not share tons with us because of the reasons of his classification. He spent his life mostly, he's passed now. He spent his life deathly afraid of being knocked off and buried in the desert because of the threats against his life by our own government officials. This is actually a script I'm working on for a feature film about his life because it was so intense growing up inside this household where he was working on crash site material and searching for all these pieces across the deserts of UFOs. Um, Before he died, after he had already started fighting prostate cancer, I had we knew we knew he wasn't he probably didn't have a year or more. I asked him, I said, there's just no way that you can go and take all this with you. Can I record you? So we went to a hotel, the Indian Reservation Casino up in the mountains of southern New Mexico, and he allowed me to record him for hours and hours as I asked him all these things. And I love that you went there, Laura, because I think people are just now getting a sense of these whistleblowers, what they're saying in congressional testimonies or in their own writing. They're saying things about like, well, there's biological entities, or that we know with the U.S. government has known that there's biological entities. Um, and then it may even get to the point where we've learned that there are hybrids or extraterrestrials who are among us. Now, I can't say tons because of the script I'm working on and issues of intellectual property, but one of the most, I think, titillating aspects of my dad's story is that on that level he's working on, he had those. Because on that level, you don't really know whose people's families are. You don't even know if you've learned their real name. You don't know if you know their real history. All you know is that they're working on a project and they're in your building for a few weeks or on this one mission sort of thing. Um, but maybe he wasn't supposed to, but he became friends with this guy who was I don't know, Laura. He didn't know really how to be human. I mean, he didn't know what rhythm was. Like we'd play music and he's like, "What are you moving to?" And we're like, "The beat." He's like, "What's a beat?" Like, and he's in his 40s. How do you not know what a beat? How do you
Hmm.
not hear a rhythm in a song?
Yeah.
And then one time he had said like, "Oh, his body, he doesn't drink." And we're like, "Oh, you're sober, like you don't drink for religious reasons." He's like, "No, my body can't process alcohol." And and there was like a moment later in the night where we're like, "What is that? What is okay, maybe." But he also didn't know what rhythm was. And then he talked he talked in such a way that you're like he talked about girls like he was 11. Like and about sex. Like he was so fascinating that guys and women could have this thing called sex. Now, even at my age at that time that I knew him, I was probably 15. My dad and I were both looking at each other like, what? We wouldn't have said it at the time because back in 1985, we didn't use the word spectrum or like autism, right? But we just figured he was just different. Like he was just something, there's just something different.
Hmm.
One time, my dad couldn't start his car. My dad had this Corvette Stingray, and he couldn't start it. And his friend was there, and he said, "Oh, hold on a minute." And he put his hands, he put his hands on the hood. He said, "Try it again." And my dad did it, and he started it. And my dad was like, "What? What'd you do?" He's like, "I just helped it a little." We all have the ability to take the energy we have and put it into um, even things that aren't living. And that energy that we have can propel them and add to the energy they have in them. Like it's like 1985, and I'm a 15-year-old watching this guy put his hands on a car to help my dad start it. Um, there were other things. I won't go into them, but there were other things where it just made me feel like this person is not from here. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know a lot of people say they're from different planets, things like that. But like I don't have any like I know like I have an attraction to like certain stars, certain astrological things. But I also have an attraction, but I know my family, the genes come from UK. Most of my family lineage comes from UK, Ireland, things like that. So, I mean, maybe there's something to all that. I haven't really
Yeah,
dived much into it. But when you were talking about him putting his hands on the car, it was like this image of his finger came up in my mind, whether or
exactly.
not
Yeah, exactly. It was one of those things where I don't I'm too much of an academic to just sort of like say it bluntly, but yeah, I don't think he was. And then you just I there was another thing I can't really go into how complex it was or how detailed it was, but he he um he disappeared. Like literally my dad went to work and he wasn't there and no one knew where he was anymore. So um he just disappeared. And my dad, this was like in the late 80s. My dad even wrote like to me, I think an email back in the like late 90s, early thousands that he had spent over 15, 20 years looking for him because he was such a good friend and could find no history that he ever existed and that that name clearly was not a real name and that he must have been my dad at first said for like a few years he must have been transferred, like he must have been sent to some Air Force base or something. But then after a while, and on my recording, my dad says, I don't actually think he was human. Like
Mm,
he was one of the ones that was working for our projects, but not as a human on our project. So I'm seeing this stuff in the news just this last week about maybe there are hybrids, and part of me is like, I think I may have been shown some insight into that as a teenager.
Mm, yeah, yeah. And then, how far do you think they're gonna go with exposure with everything now? What are your
I
thoughts?
I think that we're being, for me, as someone who's, very politically educated about things like colonialism and US interference in other countries and in Latin America, I'm always conscious of the fact that there's of a high possibility of psyop, psychological operations taking place for people to, for example, all the drones that we were seeing last year off the East Coast outside of New Jersey, like there were a lot of people who were at the time being like, "Oh my God, this is UFOs," and I was like, "It's not UFOs at all. It's clearly drones, but it's a test of something. It's also a test
Mhm.
to see like mass response." And I don't think we're living in a particularly great moment for disclosure because we're living in a moment in which we're being told that truth is something that you should question, and it's the erosion of the distribution of reliable information, both inside the worlds of medicine and the public health. And so I'm a little concerned that if there is something taking place right now that's within the larger spectrum of contact or, you know, disclosure of previous contact, I worry a little bit that it's being manipulated. And so there is, you might want to say, the truth of the things that you and I talked about, the truth that religious institutions and histories have known about for generations, thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And you see it in Chinese text or the Vedas or the Indian, religions. You have a lot of ways at which you can get representations of multiple truths, but you can also see people in power manipulate those for not just the accumulation of capital, but to have control.
Mhm.
And I don't think that we're immune from that. So I think that there is something taking place that's close to disclosure. And I think that there is something that's about an awareness that we're starting to recognize societally is that we're not alone and that contact. I've written about this in a peer-reviewed piece years ago that I disagree that contact is impossible, the way that a lot of people who work for NASA say it. And in fact, contact began a long time ago. I still stand behind that. I do think contact began a long time ago. And we're just in a phase of it now where it is a dissemination process across large sectors of society at the exact same moment that governments are trying to assert authoritarian control over the sharing of information and what counts as news. So it's difficult, it's challenging. So when you ask how far it'll go, I think it might go in the wrong direction first. But I
Mhm.
don't think anyone can slow the arc of societal and humanity's evolution. So I think that it'll be temporary, this complication, this notion that of distrust. I think that will pass. And I'm not saying that because of I think that, presidential administrations will pass or that political parties will pass. I just think that what is bound to be,
Yep,
you know, in the world.
exactly. Yeah. All right, David, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It was great meeting you. And where can people find you? And what
Yeah.
are your offerings?
Well, thank you. So at www.davidshorter.com, you can sort of learn what I'm up to. There's a whole section there about my life as a professor at UCLA, including the courses I teach. There's also a section there about the studies that I've been doing on healing and in the Latino world, curadismo, like the idea of healing that's come to me from my great grandmother, and then also some healers I worked with in Mexico. And then you can see some of the digital projects I've been making. And I'm also involved a little bit right now in the entertainment world. I've got one of my essays was optioned by MGM, and it's currently being shopped right now for a TV show about the childhood with my great great grandmother. So
Wow, beautiful.
thank you.
Thank you.
You've had such a really great run of people and guests coming on to talk about their life, and I just want to let you know how honored I am to be included among them. And it's just a treat to talk to you. You're doing really important work, and so thank you for including me in that.
Thank you. Appreciate
All
it.
right.
All
Take
right.
care.
Take care.